Welcome to this YouTube channel. How are you? And today we are going to look at the topic homeostasis, a Form 2 topic. It is a very common topic and one of the most bothersome topic in biology Form 2 for almost all students. Maybe I understand why. Now this topic is linked to other topics, so I would like you to be very careful with it, and also because it might be tested this year. We are going to begin with the definition, and in our definition we are going to look at the terms that must always appear in the definition. The first term is maintain, the other one is constant, the other one is environment, and the other one is internal. So the maintenance of constant environment in the body is called homeostasis. Maintenance, you tend to keep it constant, and in keeping it constant you keep it the same. For example, the normal temperature of a human being is 37. It must always remain 37 because we know that higher temperatures than those will tend to denature the enzymes, and these enzymes are found within the cell, and that's why we have the term internal. That's why we have the term internal, and the internal factor here are several of them, and they all happen to change the way the internal environment comes about. So homeostasis works in a mechanism that tries to regulate. So in that regulation, there is our word maintain. You keep it constant. So this internal environment must be kept constant so that the metabolic processes of the body will not be affected. Now there are several factors that are kept constant, and these factors all affect all metabolic processes. The first term being temperature, the other one being water levels, or what we would rather call osmoregulation or the osmotic pressure. And osmotic pressure, the water levels have something to do with ion concentration. Ion concentration is, for example, we have an excess of sodium, or we have an excess of calcium, we have an excess of potassium. They must be regulated to remain constant. And due to that reason, homeostasis operates on a system we call feedback mechanism. And feedback will always be triggered when one of these factors is affected. For example, if temperature is affected, that is, it can either increase above 37 or it can also decrease below 37. So it brings about an imbalance of that particular factor or variable. Then that we can call it a change, and that change is normally detected by an organ, and that organ that detects that change is called a receptor, and that receptor will always send that particular change. It will send an impulse to the center that controls it, and then that particular variable will be brought back to normal. For example, if temperature increases above normal, you will be able to detect the change. That change will be sent to various centers like the brain, like the skin, so that those organs can correct or can detect, can bring about a change in the increase. If you are thirsty, that is when you have to deal with water. The detecting organ here, we call it a receptor, or that organ which senses, is the kidney. The kidney will send an impulse to the brain, and then the brain will correct that first by making you drink water. There are so many mechanisms that are involved to it. So every time a factor is corrected, we call it negative feedback. If temperature is brought back to normal, that is negative feedback. If water concentration is brought back to normal, that is negative feedback. If glucose concentration is brought back to normal, that is negative feedback. But if all these fail to happen, then it is positive feedback. And positive feedback will always bring about a disease. So to our first factor, temperature. And in temperature, we have said that the temperature of normal human being will always be but around 37, mostly 36.9. So a change in temperature will always be detected by a receptor or a sensor. Then that information will be transmitted in terms of an impulse to the control, or an organ that controls that change. And the organ which will bring about that change is called an effector. For example, when the temperature goes above 37, you can have the skin changing that. You can have the skin acting or the brain acting. So you can have the brain regulating or the skin. If the temperature falls below 37, you normally see that your skin develops goosebumps, and maybe the hair will always behave in a certain manner. That is correction. So here you'll have the sensor, the control, and the effector. And the particular change in temperature is always stimulated. There's always a stimulus, or we can rather say the factor that brings about that particular change. Now, there are various ways through which temperature is corrected. For example, high temperatures, and these are normally divided into two. We have behavioral changes that affects the behavior of an animal, or physiological. Physiological are those factors within the body that affect the internal temperature. And those behavioral are, for example, removing clothes in response to very high temperatures, wearing on clothes in response to very low temperatures. In other cases, we have the blood vessels getting deeper into the skin in case of when it is very cold. And we have other cases that are physiological, like this one's mentioned here. For example, we have vasoconstriction, we have sweating, we have shivering. Those are the most common three. Now, amongst all these factors, you can see that the hypothalamus is central. Hypothalamus is a part of the brain whose one of their function is to bring about regulation of body temperature. So the hypothalamus, in this case, we can say it is a region within which the sensory information is sent in terms of it being a nervous impulse. So as behavioral examples, We know that there are normally two kinds of living organisms. We have poikilotherms and homeotherms. Now, these poikilotherms and homeotherms behaves differently. They are those that we either call cold-blooded or warm-blooded. And in warm-blooded animals, we know that their internal temperatures are not affected in any way by the external changes in temperature. And for that reason, if a graph is drawn of body temperature against environmental temperature, the curve for homeotherm will always remain relatively constant. But those of poikilotherm, if the environmental temperature increases, their body temperatures will also increases. And if the environmental temperature decreases, their internal temperature will also decrease consecutively. Now, what we find about this is that this poikilotherm behaves to change their internal temperatures using different mechanisms than those of warm-blooded. And for the warm-blooded, temperature regulation takes place through various ways, and one of it is sweating. Sweating removes excess water in the body, but as this water is being lost, heat is also lost. Heat is also lost. So heat is lost because as the sweat evaporates away from the skin, there is what we call the latent heat of vaporization that is also getting lost. So in this particular case, the most important things to note is that sweat has to be made. Then you have to mention about sweat glands, and also the pores on the skin through which sweat evaporates must be open. The other mechanism is through vasodilation, and vasodilation here means that the blood vessels are affected. Now, the blood carries a lot of heat within it, and this blood can either participate in the loss of this heat or gaining of this heat. So, vasodilation means you bring blood vessels closer to the skin, and when you bring blood vessels closer to the skin, heat is lost to the environment. And the opposite of this word vasodilation is vasoconstriction. Vasoconstriction means you bring blood vessels deep to the skin, and as they are taken deep, heat is not lost. And here is an example of how this happens in this particular case of vasodilation and vasoconstriction. Here we have let's say our surface of the skin, and we have our blood vessels going in that manner. When it is very cold, the blood vessels go deeper. That is vasoconstriction. When it is very hot, the blood vessels go to the surface of the skin and heat is lost to the environment. So vasoconstriction, we have said, is the opposite of vasodilation, and it means the blood is being taken away from the skin so that heat will not be lost. The other mechanism is through the hair on the skin. So you have observed that during the cold season you'll normally develop goosebumps. So these goosebumps, or rather the chicken skin, is normally to trap a layer of air over your skin, and when this layer is being trapped near the skin, heat will not be lost because air is a bad conductor of heat. The air therefore becomes a layer that insulates the skin from heat loss. So we can see here that we have a visual of how of a raised hair and that which is lying flat. So when it is cold, a layer of air is trapped near the skin and heat is not lost because air is a bad conductor. But when it is very hot, there will be no air that is trapped near the skin because you need to lose heat. Therefore, air being absent will not have insulation against heat loss, and you'll have to lose a lot of heat that may have accumulated on your body. Should there be any question concerning that, leave it in the comment box, and thank you for watching.